Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. Today, we have a truly inspiring guest for episode 378. It is wild for me to sometimes pause and look at the episode number and think, this is how many episodes we've been here for. And think that some of you have listened to all of these episodes over the last 7.5 years. So I just want to say right now, thank you, dear listener. You make this podcast possible. If you are brand new here, let me introduce myself and the podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and this podcast is being recorded on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people who were here on Turtle Island long before my settler ancestors arrived. And I want to tell you, I was at this event in our area and someone was saying like, the Anishinaabe people, and someone behind my daughter was like, I was so glad that you weren't sitting there at this moment. Someone behind said, why don't they just call them, I don't know, some other term for the Anishinaabe people, or some people will say the indigenous people. And the reason why my daughter was like, I'm glad you weren't there in that moment, is because I would have turned around and explained that it's really important that when there is a group of people, we listen to what their word is for themselves. I can tell people what my name is, and then I hope they use my name. And for some people, it might be hard for them to say my name. But it's really important that we do listen. An Anishinaabe friend of mine told me, along with a group of people, look, many people came and called us so many things throughout the years. And what we call ourselves is Anishinaabe people up in my area here. So just a little story behind that. Okay, so I'm a Canadian yoga teacher, a mom of 3. My daughter just realized the other day when she turns 20 this year, all of my kids will be in their 20s. So they're not little kids. I'm also an entrepreneur and a forever student who loves to ask questions. And that's why podcasting feels like a good fit. I love that we can hang out and learn together. And this podcast was made for you, the yoga teacher, because I get how it feels to be out in the real world as a yoga teacher. And this podcast is a place where you can connect to a supportive community of other yoga teachers, while also connecting to ideas and information that are going to help you in the day-to-day, life that you are building, this business that you are growing as a yoga teacher. Returning listeners, thank you so much again for hanging out here for as many episodes as you've listened to. Oh my gosh, maybe it's all of them. That's amazing. I'm super grateful for you. I'm also really grateful for our sponsors for today's episode, OfferingTree and Pelvic Health Professionals. So, OfferingTree is a software that I use and love in my own business because it makes everything easy and automatic, from bookings, payments, Zoom links, reminders, and so much more. And we have a discount code for you if you are thinking about checking it out. Make sure to go to OfferingTree.com/Shannon. Today's episode is also brought to you by Pelvic Health Professionals. And I announced last week, and I've been chatting about it each week here on the podcast for the last few episodes, that the membership is going to continue, even though I'm passing the torch to someone else who's going to run the membership. So I have shared that I really had this pull to be out in nature more and growing food and growing pollinator-friendly plants and figuring out a way to connect others to nature as well. And this isn't all, clear with a business plan, but I have done it before. I used to run a farmer's market for 5 years. I had a 2-acre vegetable garden, and it's not going to look the same, but I'm doing some version of that. And if you want to see more of that, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at the Connected Yoga Teacher on Instagram. And the podcast is staying here for you. So just in case you're like, oh my gosh, is Shannon just going out to the garden full time? No, the podcast is staying here for you. But as of August 2024, we have a new owner of Pelvic Health Professionals. And what's exciting is that they've invited me to be in there as well as a guest speaker. And I'll be hanging out as a member because I'm still really excited about pelvic health information and supporting movement educators and healthcare professionals with this. But I won't be running the show, but I am very excited that I get to introduce you to the new owner soon. And I'm excited that that work is going to continue. If you're interested in learning more, checking it out, head on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Oh, I'll also share some live calls that we did, some live calls that are coming up, and tell you some key takeaways later in today's episode. Okay, let's get into today's episode. I am so honored to have Sumaya K. Owens joining us. Sumaya is a content marketing strategist, trauma-informed yoga teacher, and a passionate advocate for ethical leadership and social justice. Their extensive experience in wellness, sustainability, and nonprofit is deeply rooted in their commitment to inclusive and trauma-informed practices. We delve into the concept of embodied leadership in this episode, as defined by Sumaya, and its relevance in navigating our busy lives while also making ethical decisions in our business. We explore the nuances of power, privilege, and what it means for every yoga teacher to embody leadership in their communities. I love how Sumaya talks about how every yoga teacher is a leader in their community in some way. Sumaya courageously shares their experiences, including speaking out on the situation in Myanmar, and offers invaluable insights on how we can show up for difficult conversations while advocating for social justice sensitively and effectively. Throughout our conversation, we touch upon the importance of knowing our values, fostering supportive communities, and embracing collective care over individual self-care or sort of alongside it. And that's why I love how it goes along really well. That the episode we recently did with Muna Shakur, where we talked all about collective care. So let's dive in and meet Sumaya today and dive into this conversation of embodied leadership. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Sumaya. It's so great to have you here today.
Thanks so much for hosting me. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited that we get to talk about embodied leadership. We can get into what that means in a moment. But before we do that, for our listeners who might not know who you are, what's the work that you do and who do you do it for?
Of course. Thanks so much for asking. I am a yoga teacher and also an ayurvedic health coach and body worker. And I have also founded a company called Present Moment Media, and we offer digital marketing services for health and wellness professionals. And primarily in my consulting work, I have clients that are yoga teachers, health coaches. We also do a lot of work with the LGBTQ community, and primarily because I'm a queer person, we just have a lot of clientele in that area also. But in my yoga practice and in the classes that I teach, primarily right now, I am working with immigrant and refugee women and children, and that's the primary student body that I've been working with for the last several years.
So tell me, how did you get into that work then?
Well, I have been teaching yoga in various, community settings for almost 20 years. Back in the day, I would teach, classes for homeless folks at the library. I had a few classes for neurodivergent youth and after-school care programs with high-risk youth, and had quite a few other different community-based projects that I was working with in North Carolina primarily. And At one point, I was traveling in Thailand. I was actually there attending a Thai bodywork training. And a few of my colleagues here in Asheville, they work with a nonprofit that has humanitarian efforts all around the world. And they had mentioned they had a project in Thailand and suggested that maybe I check it out while I was there. And so I decided to spend time with an organization that offers quite a bit of outreach with immigrant and refugee women and children in Songkhlaburi, Thailand. And in those outreach efforts, they offer quite a bit of basic necessities, clothing, food, housing, but also offering yoga and wellness programs as well. So I volunteered with them for the first time about 7 years ago, and I've been immersed and engaged with various other related projects ever since.
That's amazing. I love to hear that you're taking yoga off the mat and also bringing yoga to people who might not have access to it otherwise.
Absolutely.
What does embodied leadership mean to you?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. um, in the last few months, my team and I have been putting together content for this new project we're working on, which is an embodied leadership meetup group through meetup.com. It's effectively a networking group and support group for local leaders where I live in Asheville. And the definition that we put together, which may be different than other definitions of embodied leadership, but the one we're exploring right now, is embodied leadership is the practice of turning your attention towards the physical body and sensations while in a position of power or privilege.
Okay. So if we break that down, it's like sorry, the first part was what was it? Physical sensations.
Bringing our attention towards the physical body and sensations.
And so what does that look like in terms of and then using our power and privilege? Can you give me an example or break it down or explain if someone was like, "What? I don't know what that means that you do."
Absolutely. Well, in my consulting work with business and nonprofit leaders, many of them are in the health and wellness field, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their jobs are easy or relaxing. And for anyone who is a business or nonprofit leader, many of our jobs are fast paced, they're stressful, they're really hectic, and we have to make really difficult decisions on a regular basis. And for me, I'm in a position of needing to make decisions on a regular basis while also managing the stress of being a single parent and running a company on my own and also being engaged in the community. And it's a lot of work for me to do that and also stay calm and make rational decisions, right? So it's a daily effort for me, but it's also quite a reach for many of my clients. And I see the work that they're doing, to try to be responsible and ethical as leaders, but it doesn't always mean that it's easy. And so one of the ways that we can be in the present moment and making decisions that are really aligned with who we are and with our values is to bring our awareness back to the physical body, because oftentimes that can be such an amazing guiding light for that decision making process. And so as an example, when I was previously working as a spa manager in the corporate sector, which is what I did before I became a consultant, I was working in corporate spa management, and I had, many stressful decisions I need to make about hiring people, firing people, cutting budgets, increasing budgets, on kind of a large scale because it was a bigger company. And, one of the things that I would see happen with other leaders in that industry is they would be having a stressful day for whatever reason, and they would make these really impactful decisions without really taking the time to check in with their own body and understand, hey, I'm under a lot of stress today, and maybe right in this moment is not the best time, and it's not the best place for me to make that decision. And so I would see leaders, being under stress, who would make decisions such as letting a team member go, and then later on feeling guilty and thinking, maybe that wasn't the right decision. I was just having a really bad day, right? And so I see this kind of thing happening all the time in my field. And I really just wanted to create a space for leaders to be able to have these conversations together and support each other through this experience, because it's hard and we need help.
It is. I love it when I meet up with someone and they assume that they're like, "What do you do?" And if I say, "I'm a yoga teacher," they're like, "Oh, what a relaxing job." And I was just having this conversation with a yoga teacher this week where she said, like, this student is supporting her husband who has like terminal cancer. And this student, this thing just happened to them. And this student can't get the surgery they need. And she's holding space for all of those people, running her own business. Like you said, making decisions is a lot. Is a lot.
Absolutely. And then the next layer is that as leaders, many of us are also survivors of trauma, as am I, and we're also experiencing so much collective trauma and social trauma, intergenerational trauma all across the globe right now. It's really difficult to negate that from our daily experience as well. And then not only that, so many of our clients or students, the people we're working with and for, they have experienced trauma as well. And so it makes it even more acutely necessary to have the skills and the tools to be embodied as leaders. And not to say that I'm doing a perfect job or that I have all the answers, because I certainly don't. But in starting this project, it was really just a way for me to kind of make a support group for myself almost, and also to just bring the community together, to have those conversations. And in leading up to the beginning of this meetup group, I had a few coffee chats with a few community members, and there were so many people from so many different industries. So it wasn't even just the yoga industry, just so many industries where people were talking about their staff or the clientele they work with and how much stress they were under and the trauma that they were having to face just in the communities that they were working with directly.
So then, if our teachers can't meet up with you in person in Asheville, what are some of the things that you would tell them? Hey, if you're really struggling, like what are some of the things that you maybe wish that you would have known years ago?
Right. Thank you for asking. Well, one of the topics that I've been exploring in my, studies and exploration in embodied leadership is we have so much emphasis, I think as yoga teachers, on the work we're doing on the mat. And that work is important and that work sustains us and nourishes us. And we need that work. But the work that's off the mat is just as crucial, and maybe even more so right now than it ever has been, personally, is how I feel. Just in the current moment, there's so much that we can be doing for each other and out in the community. And I think that is really important work. And also brings us closer into touch with our humanity. I think one of the things is how disconnected that yoga seems sometimes from the rest of the world. It's like yoga is sort of its own little bubble sometimes. I don't know if you feel that way, but I feel
Yes.
that way.
Yes. And
And
people want that. They want like a little bubble of there's nothing bad going on in this space here. Yes.
right. And the kind of gaslighting that happens inside of that can be really difficult for me personally, because I am out in the community and I am working with refugees and immigrants, and they don't have the option to just pretend that everything is love and light. Because the students that I am teaching, they're actively bombs dropping in their villages right now. There is a draft happening where they are now bringing in young people. Few of those people are, a few of my students are old enough to be drafted. I have, like, a lot of my students are young. They might be drafted and I could just never see them again. This is the kind of thing that makes me feel so lost in the yoga bubble sometimes, because I really want for my colleagues, to just open their eyes and see that some of our students don't have that choice, but we still have to help them. We have to find ways to help them. And I think being in those communities has really helped me to understand how, as a leader, I am in a position of power. I am in a position of privilege, and it is my responsibility to be incredibly aware of how I'm using that for the benefit of others. Yeah.
So just to clarify on this, because sometimes people get confused if they haven't been in a lot of conversations about power and privilege. Like as a woman and as a white woman, I know like I have a high level of privilege as a white English speaking person who owns my own home, lives in a country that has free healthcare, sort of is supposed to. You know, I And I think sometimes people get confused on like if I don't have $1 million in my bank account, maybe I don't have privilege. Like I'm working hard. Life is not easy for me. And I think sometimes people get confused about that when they hear someone say like, "Well, you have privilege, so you should use it."
Right. Thank you for asking. There was a workshop I attended years ago. It was a social justice and yoga retreat that I attended in North Carolina. One of the facilitators uh, put up a whiteboard, and drew this diagram. I wish I could show it to you in my mind from my memory because it was so helpful in understanding it. But one of the ways in which they describe privilege to me that helped me to make so much sense of it is that I think many people have this misperception of privilege being a straight horizontal line where it's either you have privilege or you don't. Right. And there's no like gray area. And I think many people kind of perceive privilege as being that way, like I do have privilege or I don't have privilege. And actually, what this person helped me to understand is they drew a horizontal line through the middle of this board and then created this line that was like a wave, and it went above it and then it went underneath it and it went above it and then it went underneath it. And it was talking about the different touch points of how maybe a white person has privilege because of their skin, but maybe they're also disabled, and maybe this person also has some generational wealth, but also maybe they're queer. And it talks about how it goes ups and it has its ups and downs, and it has this gray area where we have different touch points that puts us in these different categories of power and privilege. And it's just not as black and white as people may believe in that sense. That has just been my perception in talking to so many people about power and privilege, is that it sometimes feels like a very yes or no basic question. And it's just so much more nuanced than that most of the time.
Yeah, that's so good. I think I'll try and find an episode that we did with Rauda. Am I getting that correct? I think that was the power and privilege one. I'll look. It's not easy to like think back. What episode number was that 7 years ago?
Yeah.
In the last 7 years? But I'll find it. I know that we had a conversation about that if people want to learn more. Connected Yoga Teachers, I'm popping in here for a moment with the episode number because I looked it up for you. It's episode 266. We interviewed Rauda Rahman about social location, power, and privilege. It's an amazing episode, so go have a listen to that one if you haven't already. Alrighty, let's get back into our conversation with Sumaya. I guess the other thing that comes in here is that yoga teachers might be having a listen and thinking, well, am I really a leader? Like how many Instagram followers do I need, or how many visits to my website, or how many email subscribers do I need to be a leader?
Absolutely. Personally, in my opinion, every yoga teacher is a leader. And the reason that I believe that is because anytime that you are in a position where you have power over someone else, you're in a position of leadership. And so even if someone thinks, well, I don't necessarily have power, I don't try to exert power over my students, the whole, context of being a teacher means that your students are looking to you for guidance. They're looking to you for support, and that puts you in a position of power. And what we see is that sometimes maybe yoga teachers or other professionals in our industry maybe disrupt that or maybe manipulate it in a way intentionally to take advantage of students. And obviously, we know that's not okay. But I think that we also can cause harm unintentionally by just not being aware of the power that we have. And I think that that's something that is a really delicate subject to navigate. And there's not like a right or wrong answer, in my opinion. I think we just all are, we have to do the best we can to try to bring awareness to the power and privilege we have and just navigate it the best we can. But I definitely think it doesn't matter how many followers you have. It doesn't matter how beautiful your website is or, how many students come to your class. Every yoga teacher is a leader, in my opinion.
One thing that's just coming up in my mind right now is that, and you may have also noticed this, I've noticed there seems to be an incredible amount of silence right now from the yoga world, the health and wellness spaces in the yoga world around, well, I'm thinking specifically of Palestine, but there are lots of other issues that we could talk about. I feel like yoga teachers were more in when there were conversations around racism, around the murder of George Floyd, or in the past few years, it feels like there have been more conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion work, and overall, I don't know. I guess I'm not sure what my question is, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you think there's so much silence right now. And is that part of, embodied leadership? What does that look like?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. Well, in the last few years, since I've been working with immigrant and refugee populations pretty intentionally, one of the things that I've personally been raising awareness about is the genocide in Myanmar, which most people are not posting about on my feed, except for the people that I follow that are, actively working in the country or around the country, working on, projects related to Myanmar. And there were several years that went by that I was feeling frustrated that no one else was talking about it. And I still feel frustrated that I can't really talk to anyone in my peer circle about the fact that one of my students might get drafted tomorrow and I could never see them again. And I don't even have anyone most of the time in my day to day life that I can talk to about that work because they have no idea what's happening in Myanmar. So I definitely understand the frustration of like, why aren't people talking about it? Why do I feel so alone in talking about it? Because I've been feeling that way for a long time. But I also have been acutely aware of the conversations that are happening and the conversations that aren't happening ever since October of last year. And what what comes to the surface for me, and one of the reasons that I'm really passionate about not only just the concept of embodied leadership, but intentionally creating spaces for these conversations, is that it makes me wonder, are we just incapable of having hard conversations? And do we have the skills and tools to have hard conversations, not just on the internet, but also in real life? It seems as if the past few years, because of the extreme polarization that has happened in the West and around the globe and other places too, it has become incredibly difficult for people to relate to each other. People see other people talking about Gaza, and it's triggering for them. And there's different ways that we can handle that. I mean, there is so much about what is happening that is dysregulating to our nervous system on a daily basis. Whether or not we want to acknowledge it, it's impacting all of us, globally. And one of the things that I've been reflecting on personally is, can I recognize that this is dysregulating for my nervous system and acknowledge that, and then also show up to my next meeting and be grounded and focused and ready to talk about, what are we actually doing about genocide? And not just in talking about it directly, but talking to my yoga students this morning, when I was teaching my weekly class with my Burmese students, they were asking me about peace of mind. How do I and how do I address how negative everything is? Everything around me is so negative. What do I do about it? And one of the things I said was that sometimes it just helps to just acknowledge it. And I think whenever we brush past it and say, this isn't a genocide, or it's not really that big of a deal, or I don't really care, that's causing just as much harm. And so just taking the time to acknowledge it, I think, is really important. To just acknowledge, hey, yeah, this is valid, this is real, and what we're feeling is appropriate. Our nervous systems are reacting appropriately. But then, as embodied leaders, it's also our responsibility to show up in the community and be calm and compassionate and caring human beings who take care of each other and know how to have hard conversations without lashing out at each other, without blaming each other. And I think that is maybe the greatest work that we can do right now.
Thank you for that. It's also making me think, when you were saying you've been dealing with this for years, that frustration and speaking up about Myanmar and having no one listen or no one really know, that makes me feel like a lot of compassion for you, because of the place where I feel like I am personally. And something I've really noticed, I'll try and articulate this quickly, is that I have a really close friend who has so much going on in her personal life that I would never ask her to watch what's happening in Gaza right now, or check social media and see what's happening. Sometimes she'll ask me can you give me the quick update? Um and I'm fairly careful with what I tell her what's going on in the news, because she has a lot going on in her life. But always, if she says to me, "How are you doing today?" and I'm like, "Oh, I just couldn't sleep because I was thinking about Palestinian people." She has compassion for me in that moment as a friend. She's just like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." Not that she is watching that for her own personal reasons, but she can still hold space as a compassionate person. And I've been really thinking about that, especially in the last couple of weeks, that and this isn't about me. She's just someone who's um a friend to me and supporting me. I'm not saying "Oh, it's about me and look at me, that, this is impacting me." It's just that in that moment, she can show up for what I'm sharing. I guess that's what it is.
Absolutely. It's so important that we do that for our inner circle, for our friends, our family, the people we love. And it's just as important to do it for strangers on the internet. And as a social media manager, also working in digital marketing, I'm on social media pretty regularly because I have to be. It's part of my job. And so I can't just turn it off and pretend like none of this is happening. I've not had that luxury in many years. But, what if we also took that same care and compassion, and instead of every post we see about Gaza, telling someone how we don't agree with them or whatever else comes to the surface, what if we reacted with care and compassion and saying, thank you for talking about it. I'm really sorry that this is so hard for you. And I really appreciate you. And I see you right now.
Right.
How would our world change overnight? If we could just show up with that care and compassion to everyone, to strangers on the internet, on social media right now.
I got one of the most shocking messages months back, and it still sticks with me. And this person said to me, "What you're posting is traumatizing to me. It's triggering, traumatizing. You need to put a trigger warning with this." And I was like, okay, like I felt like saying, trigger warning, there's a war and people are posting about it on social media because mainstream media is not sharing it. I felt like, wait, this isn't, well, first of all, if you're really traumatized and really triggered, probably hanging out on social media is a bad idea right now. Like if you can't handle, now you and I both know Molly, and we had her on the podcast, and she was talking about how in her experience, she was sharing things around the time of her friend being kidnapped. She was sharing some really shocking videos. As a social media, okay, now I'm like skipping all over the place. But as someone who deals with social media, like how do we handle that? Because I mean, this person that reached out to me, I still feel like they've got their own stuff to work through in terms of like me showing up and speaking out. But also, I hear from yoga teachers all the time who say, like, I don't want to traumatize my students by what I share on social media. I want to make my posts positive or helpful. How do we balance both?
Thank you for asking. I did record a video in my Facebook group a few months ago on this topic because when the bombs first started dropping in Gaza, my clients were coming to me asking me what to do. What do I say? What do I not say? Because they were feeling scared and nervous and also in shock. What is happening? What do I do? And asking me for guidance. And one of the things that I have found to be really helpful in making these decisions, again, going back to like our decision making capacity as leaders, is deciding, there's so many political and social issues at all times, and it's really difficult to pick one or the other sometimes because it just feels like there's so many. But what feels really important to me is that as yoga teachers and as leaders, that we have values and that we know what they are and that we stand up for what we believe in. And especially if it's something that's really aligned with our brand or our organization, our vision for the business or nonprofit that we run. And so for me, anything involving, immigrants or refugees, like that is aligned with my organization and my vision and what I do. And so I feel comfortable sharing about it to a degree. But I also, have certain things that I share and certain things that I don't share. I know for me personally, I don't prefer to share video content, especially really graphic video content. But I do like sharing things that are educational, like articles and things like that, where people can read. And that's just for me as a trauma survivor. I just know that sometimes seeing videos of really violent, things, it can be really triggering for me. But I think every person needs to make that decision for themselves as far as what feels comfortable for them and their audience. And I think knowing yourself and knowing your audience is really important, whenever you're managing your social media in general. That's just good information to have. Know yourself and know your audience. So there's not necessarily a blanket answer. I don't necessarily think that everyone needs to post about Gaza, but I do think we all need to be thinking about it and talking about it. And maybe that means in our yoga classes or with people we love and our family. Regardless of whether or not we post it on social media, I think it is our responsibility to be, raising awareness about what's happening in one way or another. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's super helpful. I'm popping in here again for a moment, Connected Yoga Teachers, because I want to tell you about some really exciting news that OfferingTree just put out there. They have just released an app. So maybe you don't know about OfferingTree. I use and love this software in my own business because it automates everything. And now to have an app on top of that, oh my gosh. I downloaded it this week as soon as I got the email, and I love it. One thing I love is that you stay logged in. So, no one likes to have to remember your login and your password and all the things. Students are going to love that. And I also love how you can look at the studios around you. You can book into a class, a workshop, or a training. For studios and teachers, you can now be found based on your location. So I saw right away that the studios and teachers that are in my area. I love that students can pay online or they can register depending on how you've set things up on there. They can register and then come and pay at the class. That's totally up to you. If you have multiple locations, you can manage them all from the app. And the best part, looking from the student view, is that you can see what a studio or a teacher is offering. You can browse classes, workshops, trainings. You can look at the schedule. You can even shop for gear on there, all in the app. This works both for Apple and Android. So go download it. I would say for sure, go download the free app, check it out. And then if you're thinking, wow, I need something like this to, market my yoga, show my yoga off. I really love how OfferingTree, that's the one thing that you can do right away, is you can build a very quick website, or you can integrate it with your existing website and show the things that you are putting out there into the world so that people can sign up. So if you're looking to check that out, we have a discount code for you. If you want to use the software in your own business, that's over at OfferingTree.com/Shannon. Alrighty, let's get back into today's episode with Sumaya. What do you think is sort of lacking in the conversation around embodied leadership right now in the yoga world? Like, what is really on your mind where you're watching something and you're like, no, this needs to, we need to be talking more about this part of things.
Well, in general, the last few years, there have been so many difficult conversations that we've had to navigate as a yoga industry. And I say that because I'm talking about us as yoga professionals, not to say that I'm boiling yoga down to an industry, because I'm not, but I'm specifically talking about the people who work in it. This is part of my career. I've been teaching for almost 20 years. I'm very passionate about it, and I care about what happens in our industry. I care about what happens in the yoga teacher world, if you will. I care about what's happening, and I am paying attention to what's happening. And, I have been involved in a lot of conversations with you and in your group, but also with other teachers and other groups and other settings about a wide variety of different issues, things that were happening around vaccine misinformation during COVID, a lot of conversations about appropriation, a lot of conversations about gurus, and a lot of conversations we've had to have over the last few years. A lot has been coming up to the surface. And what feels really important to me, going back to what I was saying earlier, is that we just have the capacity in our own bodies and in our own nervous systems to have those conversations, and not to get stuck in the who is right and wrong, but to be able to explore those deeper layers within ourselves and within each other, within our relationships with each other. Because that's really where we get to the juice of leadership, is not getting stuck in the heat of, am I right or are you right? Am I wrong or are you wrong? But getting to a point where we can see each other and hold space for each other, and that we can both grow and learn from that conversation. And I am still seeing those same patterns. And it's not even that it's just about one conversation. It's not just one topic. But there was another thread about appropriation that was happening locally in our community here recently, around a local yoga teacher. And I wasn't necessarily participating in it as actively, but I was paying attention. I was watching and reading and just kind of noticing what was happening. And I was happy ultimately that the conversation happened, because I think it's important and healthy for us to have these conversations. But it's the way these conversations happen that make me uncomfortable and that make me think, I feel like we can do better than this. And I feel like we need to. I feel like we just need to be better at having these conversations. And how do we cultivate those skills to have those conversations? Regulating our own nervous system, being present in the moment. Like, if I'm getting triggered, am I getting triggered by this person, or am I getting triggered by something that happened 20 years ago? Like, we need the skills to be able to notice that and pay attention to that. And to have communication skills, healthy, open, nonviolent communication skills. These are all skills and tools that we can learn. It is possible for us to learn these skills. And it's not something I learned overnight, and it's not something that I can teach overnight, and it's not something that I'm perfect at either. But I do really want to see us as a yoga community, as a yoga industry, move towards a world where we can have these conversations and really like hold each other and like take care of each other and uplift and support each other instead of tearing each other down.
Oh my gosh, super important. We had this conversation back in episode 100. There's one that I can remember for sure. Um, and it was about like supporting your peers as a yoga teacher. And it was more around like the competition of the competitiveness that sometimes comes in for studios and teachers. But now we've added on, you're right, like this whole layer of so many issues that have divided people. Um, what are some of your favorite resources for nonviolent communication and learning about that?
Well, there is the, book Nonviolent Communication, which is on my shelf right now by Marshall Rosenberg. And that's kind of a classic resource. But one of the other resources that I love personally is Thich Nhat Hanh's work on communication and his books. And there's so many threads from his books and his work that I've taken with me the rest of my life. One of the best pieces of advice about communication from his readings was, if you're angry, just walk away and wait until you are not angry anymore, and then come back when you feel ready to have that conversation in a like calm and compassionate way.
That even if it's like years later?
I mean, we all have different time frames that it takes us to get to that point. Um, but it just circling back to what we were mentioning earlier about, especially on social media, just the way that people react. It's like, what if we saw something and we felt upset and we just decided not to react in that moment? you know,
Yeah.
Put the phone down, go for a walk, and then like come back later and be like, okay, I feel calm and ready to have this conversation.
Yes. I think that's one of those moments like, um, a few people have told me that they like to show up in the comments like they would in person to a human, and that's really like people are reading your comments as well. I've been there. I've been like, "I'm gonna type this thing," and then I'm like, "Wait a minute. Wait. Is this really a good use of my time?" Um, yeah. Uh,
Well,
I'm excited that you're doing this work and that you made this happen. I'm also interested, uh, if our listeners are thinking like, "This is what I need," because it is very isolating being a yoga teacher, an entrepreneur, someone who's running your own business. Um, what would you tell them if they're thinking of starting a group like this in their area?
absolutely. Well, there's so many wonderful resources on all of these topics. But one of the organizations that I trained with, they were previously affiliated with the Trauma Institute in Boston, but they have separated and have their own center now. I think the Center for Trauma and embodiment studies, and they're still based out of Boston, but they still have all of that research available. And I think a great entry level, stepping stone into this work is reading the research that has been done about yoga and trauma. And they have the most comprehensive research that I have found in the West, and they've been doing that research for many decades. And for me, I think that's a great resource for any yoga teacher. But it is also incredibly relevant to the work we're doing, both within ourselves and with our students. And I think one of the other things that, I would highly recommend is if you wanted to start something locally, one of the things that I did in the formation of this was reaching out to local mental health professionals who also specialized in trauma and collaborated with them to help organize a few of these events. And so our monthly meetup groups right now are happening at a clinical mental health practice. And we have a variation of guest speakers that come in. Many of them are somatic professionals or mental health professionals that will come in and host talks and different educational resources. And that's been a really wonderful opportunity. And for me, also, the point was never for me to be necessarily the face of the organization or for me to lead every talk. It was really for me to offer resources to my community and create a support group for all of us. And so I also have been really open to hearing what my community wants and, what they have to share as far as what kind of resources that would be helpful for them. So that's just a few resources off the top of my head.
That's fantastic. If there's a yoga teacher listening right now and they've got like a big decision that they're thinking about, do I do this? Do I do that in their business? Can you kind of guide us on how we get into more of like an embodied state with a big decision?
Right. And so there's a couple of different ways that I approach decision making in my business. And because, not only am I quote unquote self-employed, I have an S Corp, I also have several staff members that work for me and I have a wide range of clients. And so there's just a ton of decisions that have to be made every single day. And to the point that I often get decision fatigue, like I'm just tired of making decisions and I want someone else to decide what I'm having for dinner. But the first thing that I do is ask myself, do I feel ready to make this decision? And sometimes it's, do I have all the information I need to make this decision logistically? Or do I need to, talk to my bookkeeper or maybe, ask a few questions to one of my clients before I decide what the next step is on a project? Do I have all the information? And then the next step is, do I feel regulated enough to make a decision that I know I will feel confident in later? Because I know when I'm dysregulated, that's when I'm at the highest risk of making a decision that I might regret. And so if I'm not regulated or I don't have all the information, then the first thing I do is say, let's circle back to this tomorrow or later this week. I'll put it on my calendar and say, what, I'm not ready, but what do I need to do to get ready? And I need to make the steps towards, either gathering the information I need or regulating my own nervous system in a way that allows me to make that decision in a way that feels calm and confident. And whenever I am, not feeling regulated and, I know that I need to make a decision on a tight, turnaround, like I don't actually, like if there's a deadline and I don't have time, to make that decision, then, I can take a few moments to practice grounding, myself. And, there's ways we can do that with breath, with movement, with tapping, with moving our eyes, with just different things we can do to just regulate ourselves in the moment and bring us back to the present moment. And if I still don't feel sure after that, then oftentimes I ask for help. I ask for guidance. And sometimes I ask the ancestors for guidance. Sometimes I ask my colleagues for guidance or a mentor. And it's also okay to not know the answers. I think as a leader, we're put into this position of feeling like we have to have all the answers. And I think one of the best things that we can do as leaders is know when we don't have all the answers and ask for help. Because that means we'll be more effective in the work that we're doing. When we ask for help, we make better decisions. Yeah.
So helpful. Thank you for this work that you're doing. Tell our listeners, how can they learn more from you or work with you? Like, where do they go to find you?
Absolutely. Well, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram as Present Moment Media. I also have a free Facebook group called Holistic Digital Marketing Strategies. My Facebook is presentmomentmedia.org. And we also have a retreat that is coming up at the end of July on embodied resilience. We're also co hosting the retreat with our dear friends at Yoga Mandala Project, who were featured on this podcast a few months ago. And we're really excited because we will be sharing, our lessons that we have learned as leaders, as well as sharing our experiences of working with immigrant and refugee students from around the world. And I'm really excited to host Molly and Susan for this retreat here in Asheville, and would love to host all of you here. If you'd love to join us, then please reach out to me anytime.
That's amazing. I'm excited to include those links, especially because um, I saw some of the posts when Molly was in Ireland, and just hearing about what it's like to get together in community right now. I mean, whether we're post pandemic or still in a pandemic, that's to be decided. But I feel like it's really nice to be able to connect in person. So I'm so excited that you're hosting a retreat. Tell us, like, what are the dates of the retreat? And
Absolutely. It is starting on July 25th until July 28th. And it's at Promet Institute in Marshall, North Carolina, just a few minutes north of Asheville, where I live.
nice. Okay.
And I
Um,
just want to say a shout
yeah.
out to Molly and Yoga Mandala Project because, as I was saying earlier, I spent so many years feeling so alone, especially during the pandemic, talking about things that were happening in Myanmar because the military coup started in, 2021, but the, conflict had been going on for many years before that. But, it became really heightened during COVID, and it was really isolating not having that community in person. And when I attended a retreat with Yoga Mandala Project in Arizona this past fall, it was really the first time that I really gathered with that many people in person who were also doing really similar work. And just to be in a room full of people for an entire weekend to have these conversations and to listen to each other and support each other and take care of each other was really powerful. And one of the things that I really took away from that was collective care. Just how are we taking care of each other? And it was such an amazing experience for me. And I'm so excited to host Yoga Mandala Project here in Asheville and share that with our community here.
That's amazing. Oh, I love to hear about that. Collective care is something that I feel like we haven't heard enough about. We're really talking about self-care. It's interesting because I just talked to Muna here today. I don't know when the episode's going to go out in relation to this one, um, about, like, exactly that collective care, and really thinking about the collective instead of always like it is important to have self-care, self-love, all of those things, but it doesn't exist all on its own. We need to really take care of the collective as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our yoga teachers before we sign off?
Well, it is Mental Health Awareness Month. And since we're on that topic of self care, our next meetup group that we're having, we're actually talking about community and collective care. And what came up for me in writing the content for the gathering was that there's so much emphasis on both self-care, but also in the Western mental health model, there's so much emphasis on this one-on-one session that we have with a therapist or psychiatrist or a coach. And there's not as much emphasis on the community care. How are we taking care of each other collectively? How are we building community together in ways that really nourish us? And that's a conversation that I'm really excited to have this year. And I would love to open that conversation to any of you who are listening. If that's something that you're excited about, please reach out because I'd love to talk to you about it.
Oh, that's interesting. So do you do those online or in person?
So our meetup groups right now are in person, and we're also building more digital resources. So we have some free webinars and stuff that are going up on the site right now, but because it's a new project, it's just kind of slowly building. But I am interested in just talking to more people about it, because if I hear feedback from different people about things they're interested in, I'd love to, utilize that to create new conversations. And I'd also love to hear from anyone from afar who's, interested in this kind of work to build more digital resources, because we're always open to collaborating. We love having partnerships and community building. We're very much about community building and what we do. And so please reach out anytime if you'd like to chat more.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was so great to talk with you, Shannon.
Thank you so much, Sumaya, for this conversation, for talking to us about embodied leadership. I definitely had lots to think on. I really have been looking at how I want to show up and integrate my own yoga practice with how I show up. So this interview really stuck with me well beyond when we had this chat a while back. Connected yoga teachers, I highly recommend connecting with Sumaya, and whether that's, because you want to work on your social media presence with someone who really has their values outlined very well, who is practicing yoga both on and off the mat, but also if you're thinking about how can I connect more with people in my community, or how can I, look at really embracing being a trauma-informed yoga teacher. There are lots of things that Sumaya is doing out in the world, the work that they are doing, as well as the online presence that they have. I highly recommend connecting with them. If you're looking for the links for today's episode, they're over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/378. Also on there, you can leave a review for the podcast. I haven't asked for that for a while, and I need to do that. If you are enjoying the podcast, or if you have some feedback about it, leave us a review. We read each and every one, and it's so nice to hear from our listeners. If you want to hang out in real time, we have a really exciting call coming up inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. So I am going to be there at this call. I have to check if I'm hosting this one or if it's the new owner of Pelvic Health Professionals that's hosting it, but I'm definitely going to be there and have lots of questions. Carolyn Van Dyken is going to talk with us in the middle of August. I think it's August the 12th. Yes. And we're going to be talking about when our yoga students come to us and tell us that they want to be able to cough, laugh, sneeze, and jump without leaking. And that's leaking urine. What can we offer them? Why is this happening? In many bodies, it's a pretty common thing that does happen. And what can we as yoga teachers offer to people who are dealing with this issue? And I love that we're going to cover this in a whole call. One of our members asked the question, and it's a really good one. It comes up all the time. And so if you want to join that call, you can do that over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Also in there, we've had some amazing calls. In June, we did one all about weight-inclusive fitness and wellness care with Dr. Lisa Folden. My key takeaway in that one was, you know what? Take the BMI and chuck it. It is not effective. It is not useful. And many people in the healthcare field are still going by BMI and are not helping people by doing that. And Dr. Lisa breaks that down for us. And then the other call that we recently did was with Anne Marie McQueen, who talked to us about anxiety and sleep issues in perimenopause. Oh my gosh, there were so many key takeaways in this episode. I mean, basically, one of the big ones that I loved is that Anne-Marie talked about, this is all-encompassing. We can look at what's physically happening in the body. We can look at hormones for sure, but let's also look at somatic practices and therapy for dealing with what life is throwing us at this time in the middle of our life around perimenopause. It was a fascinating call. We've got such great feedback about that call. So if you want to check those out, the recordings are over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. If you have something that you want to share with us here on the podcast in an audio message, I would love that so much, so much. Tell me if I have permission to share it or not. Introduce yourself. You can do that right from our homepage, theconnectedyogateacher.com. There's a little voicemail button. It will limit you to 90 seconds, but that's okay. You can leave multiple messages and keep chatting away and tell us who you are, where you are, what's the work that you do, and then tell us what you'd like to share. Maybe you want to talk about the podcast. Maybe you have a question. We love to hear from our listeners. Thank you so much to our team over here, Suzanne, Crunch, and Sinead, for making the podcast possible, and also for just the amazingness of these people. Connected Yoga Teachers, it is not lost on me every single week how lucky I am to be in connection with these three people. Not only to make the podcast, but also to see the work that they're doing and to hear them talk about their reaction to things that are going on in the world and how they just want the best for everybody. My goodness, I am so grateful for this team that makes this possible. I'm also so grateful for you, dear listener. You make this podcast possible. I'm blown away each and every week by the comments in our Facebook group, the support in our Facebook group. If you're not already in there, head over to theconnectedyogateacher.com and look for the join button. What an amazing group of people supporting each other in this journey of being yoga teachers and running a business. Wow, that's amazing. I'm also so honored to be part of the journey in some way. You're here listening all the way to the end of the podcast. Many of you reach out in response to our emails or by voice message or on social media and tell us how the podcast is supporting you, and that means a lot. I will share a little personal note. I'm looking forward to gathering with a couple of friends who I've known since grade 9. That's a long time ago now. And we have stayed friends and we are going to hang out. That hasn't happened. Well, I guess we did see each other last year. It happens every once in a while, but we have a whole week together and we're going to be out in nature and we're going to be camping. And I'm really looking forward to it. My soul needs this. I know my friends also were saying the same thing and we made it happen. So I guess I'm going to close out saying that's definitely how I'm connecting with nature and friends and people. And I want to ask you, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?